Hello everyone. So this is the first of a series of videos by Professor Charu, which are focused on demand. So just a little recap so you can remember where we are in our narrative and storytelling. We did the production possibility frontiers, which was a depiction of the choices we had on what an economy could do, but we didn't actually have a good theory about how the economy made those choices. We then took a step back and thought about the circular flow, where we looked about the kinds of relationships that we saw within an economy, where some kind of coordination had to happen so that members of the economy could coordinate their actions to make these decisions about what, how much, and whom, for whom to produce. And that was the circular flow, where we were looking at consumers, producers, input markets, input suppliers, and so on. And then we took a step back and said, there's lots of different ways of doing this. The dominant way of doing it, which is going to be the focus of our course, not exclusively, but majority of the time, is going to be the market mechanism. And that's because in our society, we live in a world where that's the way we do it. It's not the way it's always been done. It's not the way in which every society does it. Even in our society, there's lots of moments where we don't use the market mechanism to decide what, how much, and for whom to produce. If you talk to members of a family, people don't tell you, I look at the market mechanism and see how much money my children can pay before I decide whether I give them food. We don't do that, right? Inside households, we actually don't use market mechanisms. And we'd be kind of creeped out if people used market mechanisms and prices and money to talk about the relationship between their parents, themselves, their grandma, whatever, right? It's not just that the market mechanism isn't used everywhere, it's that all of us actually have ideas about where it should be used and where it shouldn't be used. We'd get really upset if we use the market mechanism to leave the household for a minute, if we use the market mechanism for judgment. If you heard that lawyers and judges were going to sell judgment to the highest payer, you wouldn't say, oh, lovely, the market's at work. You'd be like, wait, isn't that corrupt? We expect our legal system to not operate by the market mechanism. We expect our politicians to not be available to the highest bidder. Right? So there's actually entire spheres of life where we think the market mechanism should not be in operation. That said, there are spheres of life where we think the market mechanism should be in operation, and it actually, for many of us, and as we'll figure out as we go on, we have ways of thinking about whether, okay, is this a good decision to go through markets? Is this something that works with markets? What's going on? But before you come to that point, it's kind of useful to figure out what the market mechanism is. How does it work? You can't really assess whether a mechanism is good or bad if you don't know how it works. And finally, if you know how it works, you can avoid blanket judgments. You can avoid that 1-0 thinking where somebody says to you, is it good, is it bad? And you want to reply and say, well, wait a minute. What kind of question is that? Is it good, is it bad? You want to ask, good for what? Good in what circumstances? Good for which decisions? And good when? And that is what this course is about teaching you. So for me to get you there, I first need to get you to understand just how it works. Not whether it's good or bad, just how it works. So the simplest way to think of a market mechanism is to think of multiple types of markets. And we're going to start with the simplest one, the one that most of us are familiar with and have experienced. Markets in final goods and services. These are the markets where people buying things like apples, oranges, newspapers, milk, ordinary everyday final goods and services meet, as consumers, meet people who are selling these ordinary everyday goods and services. It's when you go to the Rite Aid to buy something. It's when you decide whether you want to go to the Safeway, or you want to go to Whole Foods, or you want to go to the local farmer's market to get your tomatoes. That is the level at which we're going to start. We're going to complicate this as we go on. But our first market mechanism, therefore, is going to be what is called the very simple, basic, competitive market of supply and demand. Consumers buying final goods and services, meeting producers selling final goods and services. This is not the way in which other markets, say labor markets where people selling their labor meet firms buying their labor, financial markets where people selling bonds and stocks, which is trying to borrow debt, acquire debt in exchange for people who are trying to dispose of their savings. This is not the way necessarily in which a whole lot of markets work. But if we start here, this will give us some insights that we can carry forward even to these other markets. So we can adjust some of the insights we learn here to say, oh, okay, I figured this out. What am I going to adjust for these other markets? So let's start now with the simplest of markets, where consumers meet producers, the supply and demand market.